The alarms on the throne world of Thessar Prime had not sounded in over 60 years. That morning, they screamed. Admiral Corvain Dresch stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Wing, staring at a sensor screen that made no sense. A single ship had appeared inside the inner defense ring, the most protected space in the entire empire, the space that surrounded the royal palace and the throne of King Vorn Thessar himself. No fleet had ever crossed that ring without being seen for 100 years. No ship had ever slipped past the outer watch stations, the mid-range scanners, and the close orbital guns, without being noticed even once. But there it was, a single black ship, floating quietly, less than 2,000 kilometers from the palace spires. "Confirm, this is not a system error," Dresch said, his voice tight. The young officer at the sensor station, a Thessarian named Eula Bren, shook her head fast. "It is not an error, Admiral. The ship is real. It is solid. It is right there. But none of our stations logged its arrival. Not the deep watch, not the mid-ring, not even the close guns. It is like it was always there, and we only just noticed it." Dresch felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The Thessarian Empire had one of the strongest defense networks in the known stars. Their scanners could catch a shuttle the size of a fist 100,000 kilometers out. For a full warship, larger than most cruisers, to appear this close without triggering a single alarm before now was not just strange, it was frightening. "Get me a visual," he ordered. The screen shifted, and the image sharpened. The ship was long and narrow, with smooth black plating that seemed to swallow the light around it rather than reflect it. It had no visible weapons ports that anyone recognized, no markings, no flashing lights of distress or warning. It sat still in space, calm, almost patient, like a predator that was not afraid because it already knew it did not need to be. "Species?" Dresch asked. Eula checked her readings twice before she answered. "Human, Admiral. It matches old records from the War Archive. The hull design, the engine signature. This is a human ship." The bridge went quiet. Even the low hum of the ship's systems seemed to fade under the weight of that word. Human. It was a word most people on Thessar Prime only knew from history books and old war stories told by their grandparents. 60 years ago, the Thessarian Empire had fought a long and bitter war against the human race. A war that ended not with a treaty, not with a surrender, but with silence. The humans had pulled back their fleets, sealed their borders, and vanished. No contact, no trade, no war, just silence, for 60 years. So long that some scholars had begun to argue humans had gone extinct, wiped out by some disaster of their own making. And now, one of their ships was sitting quietly beside the most guarded palace in the galaxy. "Order every gun in range to lock on," Dresch said. "Full alert to the palace guard. Wake the King's Council, and someone contact the ship. Ask them what in the stars they think they are doing." It took the communication officer several tries before the strange black ship responded. When it did, the voice that came through was calm, almost gentle, completely unlike the tense shouting on the Thessarian bridge. "This is Captain Elena Marsh, of the human ship." "Quiet word," the voice said. "I am not here to fight. I have no intention of firing on anyone. I have come a very long way to speak with your king. I would like an audience with him, please, as soon as it can be arranged." Dresch stared at the speaker, as if it had grown a second head. "She wants an audience," he repeated to no one in particular. "She flies a warship into the most protected airspace in the Empire, past every single defense we have, without triggering a single alarm, and she wants to. Ask nicely." "For a meeting." "Sir," Eula said carefully, "should we open fire?" Dresch thought about it. It would have been the easy answer, the safe answer, according to old training. Any unknown ship this close to the king should be destroyed first, and questioned never. But something about this did not fit that old training. If the humans had wanted to kill the king, they would not have announced themselves. A single warship, sitting still, calm, talking. If they had wanted violence, the ship could have already fired 100 times over, while Thessarian gunners were still trying to figure out how it had arrived unseen. "No," Dresch said slowly. "Hold fire, but keep every gun locked on that ship. If it makes one wrong move, one single strange gesture, turn it to dust." He opened a channel to the ship. This is Admiral Corvain Dresch, of the Thessarian Royal Fleet. You are surrounded. Any hostile action will be met with total destruction. State your business clearly. I understand completely, Captain Marsh answered, still calm. I am carrying a message. It is meant only for your king. I will not repeat it to anyone else, not out of disrespect, but because it must be delivered directly, exactly as it was given to me. I ask for safe passage to speak with him. I will come alone, unarmed, and I will accept any search or condition you require. Dresch muted the channel and turned to his second officer. Get this to the palace, now. The king needs to hear this himself. His personal guard, a large and serious Thessarian named Bregal Khan, delivered the report in a voice that shook slightly, despite years of training to remain steady. Your Majesty, a human ship has been found in the inner ring. It arrived without detection. Its captain requests an audience with you, alone. King Vorn set down his cup slowly. He was an older Thessarian, his scales beginning to gray at the edges, his eyes sharp despite the years. He had ruled for almost 40 seasons, and in that time he had seen wars, treaties, rebellions, and long stretches of quiet peace. But he had never, not once, expected to hear the word human. Spoken with any urgency again. Alone, he repeated. Yes, Majesty. A single captain. Unarmed, by her own claim. She says she carries a message meant only for you. The king rose from his seat and walked to the wide window that looked out over the capital city, its towers gleaming gold and white in the morning light. Somewhere out there, past the clouds, past the orbital defenses that had never once failed him in 40 years, a human ship had appeared like a ghost. Call my council, he said finally, all of them, and bring General Threxus. He will want to speak loudly about this, and it is better I hear his shouting now than later. Within the hour, the throne room filled with the Empire's most powerful figures. General Threxus arrived first, his armor polished, his face set in the hard lines of a soldier who had fought in the last war, and never fully believed it was truly over. Counselor Yalna Roth came next, quieter, more thoughtful, the kind of advisor who preferred careful words to bold ones. Others followed, ministers and generals and old nobles, all whispering the same word to each other. Human. This is a trap, General Threxus said the moment the doors closed. It has to be. A single ship slipping past our entire defense grid is not luck, Majesty. It is a demonstration. They are showing us what they can do. They want us afraid before we even speak to them. Or, Counselor Yalna said calmly, they want to show us that if they wish to harm us, they already could have, and yet they have not. That is also a message, General, and perhaps a more important one. You would have us welcome them with open arms, after what they did to us in the war? I would have us listen, Yalna answered, before we decide what they did or did not do. It has been 60 years. None of us truly know what happened on their side of that silence. The king raised a hand, and the room quieted at once. Enough. I have made my decision already. I will hear this captain, alone, as she has asked, though my guards will remain close enough to act if there is any true danger. General Threxus, you will personally oversee her search and her escort. If there is even the smallest trick hidden in her ship or on her person, I trust you to find it. Threxus bowed stiffly, clearly unhappy but unwilling to argue further in front of the full council. As you command, Majesty. The king turned to the window once more, watching the distant shape of the black ship on the display screen brought in by his aides. It sat still, patient, unmoving, like it had all the time in the world. Bring her down, King Vorn said quietly. Let us hear what the humans have to say, after 60 years of silence. Hur. The shuttle carrying Captain Elena Marsh descended through the golden clouds of Thessar Prime, under heavy guard. 6 Thessarian fighters flew close beside it, weapons ready, though the shuttle itself made no attempt to resist or escape. Inside, Elena sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, watching the strange golden city rise up to meet her through the small viewport. She was not what General Threxus had expected when the shuttle finally landed and its door opened. He had pictured a soldier, hard and cold, someone built for war. Instead, the woman who stepped out was of average height, dressed simply in a dark gray uniform, with no medals, no rank symbols beyond a small patch on her shoulder, no visible weapons at all. Her hair was tied back plainly, her face calm, almost tired, like someone who had traveled a very long way and was glad to finally stand on solid ground. "Captain Elena Marsh," she said, offering a small, polite bow, one that was clearly not native to her, but had been learned out of respect. "Thank you for allowing me to come." Threxus studied her closely, waiting for some sign of a trick, a hidden weapon, anything. His soldiers had already searched her twice, scanned every inch of her clothing and her skin, and found nothing. No weapons. No devices beyond a single small case she carried, which had also been searched and found to contain nothing more dangerous than a folded piece of thin, silver material, almost like cloth, covered in strange symbols none of them recognized. "You will walk exactly where I tell you," Threxus said, his voice hard. "You will not speak to anyone but the king. If you attempt anything unusual, you will be stopped, permanently. Do you understand?" "I understand completely," Elena said, without any anger or fear in her voice. "I only want to speak with your king, nothing more." They walked her through the long golden halls of the palace, past statues of old Thessarian heroes, past guards who stared at her with open suspicion, past nobles who peered out from behind curtains and doorways to catch a glimpse of the first human seen on their world in 60 years. Elena walked calmly through all of it, her eyes taking in everything quietly, missing nothing, though her face gave away little of what she was thinking. At last, the great doors of the throne room opened before her, and she stepped inside, to see King Vorn Thessar seated upon his high golden throne, surrounded by his most powerful advisors, all of them watching her with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and old, buried anger. Elena stopped a respectful distance from the throne, and bowed again, deeper this time. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steady and clear across the silent room. "My name is Captain Elena Marsh, of the human ship." Quiet word. "I have traveled a very long way to bring you a message, one that could not wait, and one that only you should hear first." King Vorn leaned forward slightly on his throne, his old eyes studying her with a sharpness that had not dulled with age. 60 years of silence," the king said slowly, "and now a single ship and a single woman standing before my throne with a message. Tell me, Captain Marsh, after all this time, what could your people possibly have to say to mine?" Elena took a slow breath, and for the first time since she had landed, a flicker of something serious crossed her calm expression. "Your Majesty," she said, "I am afraid the message I carry is not a small one. It concerns a danger greater than the war we once fought, a danger that is coming for both our peoples whether we are ready for it or not. I would ask, with great respect, for a private audience, so that I may explain everything, from the beginning." The throne room fell into a heavy silence. General Threxus's hand moved slightly toward the weapon at his side. Counselor Yalna leaned forward, her sharp eyes fixed on the human captain, and King Vorn Thessar, ruler of the Thessarian Empire, sat very still upon his throne, weighing the strange, quiet request of the woman who had appeared like a ghost beside his palace. "Clear the room," the king said at last. "All but my personal guard, General Threxus, and Counselor Yalna. I will hear this message. But Captain Marsh, understand this clearly. If what you say is a trick, if this is some new trap laid by your people, you will not leave this room alive." Elena Marsh nodded slowly, her expression calm and unafraid. "I understand, Your Majesty," she said, "and I would expect nothing less. But I promise you, what I have come to say is not a trick. It is a warning, and I fear we do not have very much time left to prepare for it." Before the doors closed fully, one of the younger guards, a boy barely out of training named Osik, lingered near the entrance for a moment longer than he should have, his eyes fixed on the calm human woman standing in the middle of the great hall. He had grown up on stories of the war, told by his grandfather, who had lost an arm fighting humans on a cold moon at the edge of old Thessarian space. Osik had always imagined humans as monsters, tall and cruel and without mercy. The woman standing before the king looked nothing like the monster from his grandfather's stories. She looked tired, and careful, and strangely sad, like someone carrying a heavy weight she had carried for a very long time. "Osik," barked the senior guard beside him, "close the door." The boy obeyed at once, and the heavy doors sealed shut with a final, echoing sound, leaving him alone in the outer hall, with his own confused thoughts about monsters and grandfathers and quiet, sad-eyed women who came bearing warnings instead of weapons. Earlier that morning, before the shuttle carrying Elena Marsh had even begun its descent through the golden clouds, word of the strange human ship had already begun spreading through the palace in hushed, frightened whispers. Servants passed the news between kitchens and hallways. Nobles woke their households early, demanding answers from anyone who might know more. By the time the sun had fully risen over the capital, half the city already knew that a human warship sat quietly in the sky above them, and no one, not even the palace guards, seemed to know exactly why. In the lower city, far below the golden towers where the wealthy and powerful lived, an old woman named Brenna Colt sat on her narrow balcony, watching the sky nervously, with eyes that had seen the old war firsthand as a young soldier decades before. She remembered the sound human ships made when they attacked, remembered the fires that had burned across 3 of her home colonies before the silence finally came and the fighting stopped. She did not know whether to feel relief or terror at the news that humans had returned, silent and unannounced, right beside the palace itself. "They say it hasn't fired a single shot," her neighbor called down from the balcony above, an anxious younger man named Tovis, who worked in the shipping yards near the capital's edge. "Just sitting there, waiting. Waiting is what worries me most," Brenna answered grimly. "An enemy who attacks, you understand. An enemy who simply waits, quietly, patiently, right beside your king's own palace. That is something else entirely." Across the city, similar conversations echoed in countless homes, some fearful, some curious, a few even hopeful, that after 60 long years, the humans had finally returned not for war, but for something else entirely. No one, not even the palace guards standing watch over the strange black ship, could say for certain which of these possibilities was true, and that uncertainty hung over Thessar Prime, like a heavy fog throughout the entire long morning. "Back aboard the flagship!" Iron Wing. Admiral Corvain Dresch continued monitoring the situation closely, even after the shuttle carrying Captain Marsh had descended safely toward the palace. He did not fully trust the calm the human captain's voice had carried, no matter how reasonable her words had sounded. 60 years of training had taught him that calm voices could hide the sharpest knives, and reasonable words could disguise the cruelest traps. "Keep full sensors trained on that ship," he ordered his crew. "If it makes even the smallest movement while its captain is away, I want to know instantly." "Understood, Admiral," Eula Bren answered, though her voice carried a note of something closer to curiosity than fear now. "Sir, may I ask something?" Dresch glanced at her. "Speak freely, Officer Bren." "The ship has had every opportunity to strike since it first appeared," Eula said carefully. "It could have fired on the palace the moment it arrived, before we even knew it was there. It could have destroyed half our inner fleet before we managed to raise a single shield. Instead, it simply waited, and its captain asked politely for a meeting. Does that not seem strange for an enemy planning an attack?" Dresch considered her words for a long moment before answering. "It seems strange, yes. It also seems strange 60 years ago when human fleets withdrew from 3 fully conquered systems, rather than press their advantage further, in the final days of the war. I never understood that decision then, and I confess I do not fully understand this one now. Perhaps, Officer Bren, humans are simply stranger than we have ever properly understood." Eula said nothing further, though she continued watching the silent black ship on her sensor screen, with a curiosity that had slowly begun replacing her earlier fear. Inside the palace, as Elena Marsh was escorted through the long golden halls toward the throne room, she passed a wide open courtyard, where several young Thessarian children had gathered, pulled from their morning lessons by tutors, eager themselves to catch a glimpse of the first human seen on their world in living memory. The children stared at her with wide, curious eyes, none of them old enough to remember the war, none of them carrying the deep fear or anger that haunted their grandparents' generation. One small girl, bolder than the others, stepped forward slightly, and asked in a clear, piping voice, "Are you really from Earth?" General Threxus moved to silence the child immediately, but Elena raised a gentle hand. pausing just long enough to answer honestly. "I am," she said, kneeling slightly to meet the girl's eyes. "It is very far away, and very different from your world. But the sky there is blue instead of gold, and the stars still look much the same at night." The girl's eyes widened with wonder, rather than fear, and for a brief moment, the tension of the entire tense morning seemed to soften just slightly around that small, simple exchange between a curious child and a tired, careful human captain. "Enough," Threxus said firmly, though not unkindly, ushering Elena forward once more. "The king is waiting." As they resumed walking toward the great doors of the throne room, Elena found herself thinking of the wide-eyed innocence of that small girl, so different from the deep suspicion and old anger carried by the adults around her. Perhaps, she thought, that was exactly why she had come. Not merely to warn a king of a coming danger, but to offer an entire generation the chance to grow up without the same fear and silence that had shaped their parents and grandparents for 60 long years. The great doors of the throne room opened before her at last, and Captain Elena Marsh stepped inside to face King Vorn Thesser and the full weight of his powerful, suspicious council, carrying with her not only a warning of danger, but also, quietly, a fragile hope for something far better than the silence that had come before. The great doors of the throne room closed with a heavy sound, sealing in the king, his closest advisors, and the human captain, who had crossed the stars alone, to deliver a message that would change everything. With the great doors sealed shut, the throne room felt smaller, quieter, though it was still one of the largest halls on Thesser Prime. Only a handful of people remained now. King Vorn Thessar upon his high golden throne, General Threxus standing stiff and alert near the wall, one hand resting on his weapon, Counselor Yalma Rothis seated to the side, her sharp eyes never leaving the human captain. 4 royal guards stood near the doors, silent statues in polished armor, and in the center of it all stood Captain Elena Marsh, calm, patient, waiting for the king to speak first. "Begin," King Vorn said simply. Elena nodded and folded her hands in front of her. "Your Majesty, before I explain the danger I have come to warn you about, I must first explain something about my people, because I do not think your history books have the full truth of what happened 60 years ago." General Threxus made a low sound of disbelief. "Careful, human. Do not think you can rewrite history in front of the king." "I am not here to rewrite anything, General," Elena said, her voice steady but not unkind. "I am here to add what was missing. Your records say that humanity vanished after the war, that we retreated, sealed our borders, and disappeared into silence. That much is true, but your records likely also say, or at least believe, that we vanished because we were broken, defeated, perhaps even dying out." She paused, letting her words settle in the quiet room. "That is not what happened," she continued. "We did not vanish because we lost. We vanished because we chose to stop fighting a war that was destroying both our peoples for no true purpose, and because we needed time. Time to grow, to heal, to prepare for something far worse than any war between Thessarians and humans." Counselor Yalna leaned forward. "Prepare for what, Captain?" Elena took a slow breath before answering. "During the last years of the war, our deep scout ships found something out past the old border, far beyond where either of our empires had ever traveled. At first we thought it was simply an empty region of space, cold and lifeless. But our scouts found signs of something moving through it, something vast, something that consumed entire systems, stripped them of every resource, every scrap of matter, and left nothing behind but dust and silence." "A monster story," Threxus said flatly, "told to frighten children, not kings." "I wish it were only a story, General," Elena said, and for the first time, a flicker of real weariness crossed her calm face. "We call it the Hollow. It is not a single creature, not exactly. It is closer to a swarm, a vast collection of machines and organic matter fused together, spreading from system to system, consuming everything it touches to build more of itself. It does not negotiate, it does not stop, and it does not care whether the world in its path belongs to humans, Thessarians, or anyone else." The throne room was silent for a long moment. King Vorn studied the human captain carefully, searching her face for any sign of deceit, any flicker of a lie. He found none, only tiredness, and something that looked very much like fear held carefully in check. If this hollow is as terrible as you describe, the king said slowly, why have we never heard of it? Why has it not already reached our borders in 60 years? Because it is slow, your majesty. At least by the standards of empires, Elena answered. It moves system by system, consuming as it goes, growing larger and stronger with everything it takes. 60 years ago, it was still far beyond both our territories, a distant threat that seemed to belong to some future generation. That is why my people made the choice we made. We did not retreat from you, General Threxus. We retreated from the war between us, so that we could turn all of our strength toward preparing for the hollow instead. We spent these 60 years building, learning, growing stronger, not to attack you, but so that when the day came, that the hollow finally reached this part of the stars, we would not be helpless. And now you believe that day has come, Counselor Yalna said quietly. I do not believe it, Counselor, Elena said. I know it. Our deep scouts confirmed the hollow's path 3 months ago. At its current speed, it will reach the edge of Thessarian territory within 2 years. Perhaps less, if it finds a particularly rich system to feed on and grows faster than expected. General Threxus stepped forward, his face hard with suspicion. This is convenient, is it not? A human ship appears out of nowhere, past our entire defense grid, and tells us a monster is coming to eat our worlds, right when we might finally have grown strong enough to consider taking back what was lost in the last war. Perhaps this hollow of yours does not exist at all. Perhaps it is simply a story meant to frighten us into lowering our guard, or into agreeing to some alliance that benefits only your people. Elena turned to face him directly, and though her voice remained calm, there was a new firmness in it now. General, I understand your suspicion. In your place, I might feel the same. But ask yourself this, if my people wish to conquer you, why would we announce ourselves at all? My ship crossed your entire defense network without triggering a single alarm. I could have brought 100 ships instead of 1, and you would not have known until it was far too late. If we wanted war, General Threxus, we would not be standing here talking. We would already have won. The room fell silent again, and this time even Threxus had no immediate answer. King Vorn rose slowly from his throne, and walked down the few steps to stand closer to the human captain, studying her with the weight of 40 years of rule behind his gaze. You say your ship crossed our defenses without being seen. How is that possible? Our sensors are among the finest in the galaxy. They are very good, Your Majesty, Elena agreed. But our ship, the quiet word, is what we call a Darkship. It is built using technology developed specifically to avoid detection, layers of material and design, meant to bend and absorb the signals your scanners rely on. It is not magic. It is simply 60 years of careful, quiet work, built for a single purpose. Not for war against you, but for survival against the hollow, which hunts by detecting the very same signals our dark ships are built to hide from. So you built these ships to hide from a monster, Threxus said slowly, and used the same technology to sneak into the most protected airspace in my empire. Yes, General, Elena said simply, because I needed to reach your king directly, and quickly, without being stopped by fear or suspicion, before I could deliver this warning. I am sorry if that frightened your people. It was not done out of disrespect. It was done because time is short, and I judged that the risk of frightening you was smaller than the risk of arriving too late. King Vorn studied her for a long moment, his old eyes narrowed in thought. Suppose I believe you, Captain Marsh. Suppose this hollow is real, and it is coming. What is it you want from me? Why come to warn an old enemy, instead of simply letting us discover the danger ourselves, too late to prepare? Elena reached slowly into the small case she still carried, moving carefully so as not to alarm the guards, and withdrew the thin silver material that had been searched earlier. She unfolded it gently, and it unrolled into a wide, flat screen, thin as cloth but glowing softly with light of its own. Symbols and shapes began to move across its surface, and after a moment, the shapes resolved into a simple star map, with a dark, spreading stain crawling slowly across one corner of it. This is the hollow's current position and path, Your Majesty, Elena said, holding the screen so the king could see clearly. At this speed, it will reach the outer Thessarian colonies within 2 years. From there, it will continue inward, toward Thessar Prime itself, unless it is stopped or turned aside. King Vorn stared at the slow, creeping stain on the star map, And for the first time since Elena had entered the throne room, real fear flickered across his ancient face. My people have spent 60 years building defenses against this thing, Elena continued. Weapons, ships, strategies built from hard experience, fighting smaller fragments of the hollow that broke away from the main body to test unprepared systems. We know things about fighting it that could save countless lives, Thessarian lives included. I have come to offer you an alliance, Your Majesty. Not a conquest, not a trick. A true alliance between our peoples, so that when the hollow arrives, we face it together, with everything both our empires can bring to the fight, instead of standing alone and falling one by one. Counselor Yalna spoke up carefully. And if we refuse this alliance, Captain, what happens then? Elena's expression grew heavier, more serious than at any point since she had arrived. Then, Counselor, my people will still fight the hollow when it comes, because we have no choice. But we will not be able to help you as fully as we could if we stand together now, with time to prepare, to share our knowledge, to build joint defenses along your border before the danger arrives. I will not lie to you, and promise that refusing our alliance means certain destruction. But I believe, with everything I have seen, that it would cost far more Thessarian lives than an alliance would, and it may cost human lives as well, since a wounded, unprepared Thessarian border could still allow the hollow to slip through toward human space by another path. General Threxus paced slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications, his suspicions still present, but now tangled with something else, something closer to fear. Even if all of this is true, Majesty, we cannot simply take one human's word and open our entire border to their fleets. This could still be some trick, some clever plan we cannot yet see. I do not ask you to simply take my word, General, Elena said. I have brought proof, full sensor logs from our deep scouts, records of past skirmishes with fragments of the hollow, technical details of the weapons and defenses we have developed. All of it is stored on this screen, ready to be examined by your own scientists and generals. You do not have to trust me blindly, you only have to look at the evidence, and decide for yourselves whether it is real. King Vorn was quiet for a long moment, staring at the slow, spreading stain on the star map, thinking of the 60 years of silence that had suddenly broken with this single, calm, unwelcome truth. Counselor Yalna, the king said finally, take this evidence to our best scientists and generals tonight. I want a full report by morning. General Threxus, I want our border defenses quietly reinforced, without alarming the public, in case this threat is real and closer than we think. He turned back to Elena Marsh, his old eyes searching her calm, tired face one more time. And you, Captain, the king said slowly, will remain here, as my guest, until I have heard enough to make my decision. Do not think this means I trust you fully. It means only that I am willing to listen further, before I decide whether your warning is truth, or the beginning of a new and clever war. Elena bowed her head respectfully. That is more than fair, Your Majesty. I only ask that you decide quickly. The hollow does not wait for politics, and every day spent arguing is a day not spent preparing. As the guards moved to escort her from the throne room to her new quarters, General Threxus watched her go with narrowed eyes, still unconvinced, still certain there was some hidden trick beneath the calm, patient words of the human captain. But Counselor Yalna, walking close behind with the glowing star map still in her hands, found herself troubled by a different thought entirely. If the evidence proved true, if the dark stain on that star map truly was crawling steadily toward their home, then the real danger was not the woman who had come to warn them. Counselor Yalna did not go directly to the science towers that night, as the king had instructed. Instead, she stopped first in a small private study near her own quarters, where she kept old records from the war, records she had studied carefully many years ago as a young scholar before politics had pulled her toward the king's council instead. She pulled out old reports, written by Thessarian commanders during the final months of the war, reports she had not looked at in over a decade. She found what she was searching for near the bottom of a dusty file, a record from a commander named Vesa Orin, who had led the assault on 3 human colonies in the last weeks of the war. Colonies the humans had abandoned without a final fight despite having enough strength, by every measure available at the time, to hold their ground and inflict heavy losses on the advancing Thessarian fleet. The humans retreated without explanation. Commander Orin had written, "Our analysts could find no tactical reason for such a withdrawal. They had defensible positions, sufficient numbers, and functioning defenses. And yet they left, quietly, taking their people with them, destroying nothing of value behind them, out of what seemed almost like courtesy, toward whoever might follow. I confess I do not understand this enemy, and I worry that our victory here was given to us rather than earned. Yalna sat back slowly, staring at the old words with new understanding. 60 years ago, her own people had assumed those withdrawals were signs of weakness, of a broken and defeated enemy finally giving up. But if Elena Marsh's story was true, those retreats had not been signs of weakness at all. They had been the first quiet steps of a much larger plan, a plan to prepare for a danger far greater than the war itself, even as that war was still being fought. She closed the old file slowly, her earlier caution now tangled with something new, something that felt uncomfortably close to guilt. If the humans had been telling the truth for 60 years through their actions alone, and no one had thought to ask why, what other truths might her own people have missed, simply because they had been too afraid, or too proud, to look closely enough? She rose from her desk and made her way to the science towers at last, carrying not just the glowing star map Elena had given her, but also the old, dusty file from Commander Oren, intending to show both to the scientists waiting there, so they might understand the full weight of what they were now being asked to judge. In her guest chamber that night, Elena Marsh sat quietly by the window, watching the unfamiliar golden stars of the Thessarian sky, thinking of home, thinking of the long journey that had brought her here. She thought of her own commanding officers back on the hidden human worlds, who had debated for months whether sending a single ship alone into the heart of an old enemy's territory was wisdom or foolishness. "You are the only one who could do this," Fleet Admiral Bethany Cole had told her before she departed, months earlier, in a quiet briefing room, lit only by the soft glow of star charts. "You understand patience, Elena. You understand how to wait, how to listen, how to earn trust slowly, rather than demand it all at once. A larger fleet would only frighten them into war before we ever had the chance to explain ourselves properly. But one ship, one calm voice, asking simply to be heard, that might succeed where 100 warships would fail." Elena had not been certain, even then, that her admiral was right. She had spent the long, quiet months of the journey turning the mission over in her mind again and again, wondering if she would be walking into a trap of her own making, wondering if the Thessarians would simply destroy her ship the moment they detected it, before she ever had the chance to speak a single word. But she had trusted her orders, and her own careful judgment, and here she now sat, alive, having survived the first tense day of an old enemy's suspicion, having planted the first fragile seed of an alliance that might yet save both their peoples from the darkness spreading steadily behind her across the stars. She closed her eyes and allowed herself, for the first time since her ship had first slipped quietly past the Thessarian defense grid, a small measure of cautious hope. Far outside the palace, in the dark sky above Thessar Prime, her ship, the Quiet Word, continued its silent watch, unmanned but not unwatched, its systems quietly recording every movement of Thessarian fleet activity nearby, ready to warn Elena instantly if anything went wrong. It was a small comfort, knowing the ship was still there, still loyal, still waiting patiently for her return, whenever that return might come. She did not know, as she finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, that within a matter of hours, that patience would be tested in ways far more dangerous than any suspicious council meeting. Elsewhere in the palace, unable to sleep himself, King Vorn Thessar sat alone in his private study, surrounded by old books and records of the war his father had fought, and that he himself had inherited, as a young ruler, still learning the weight of his crown. He pulled out an old portrait of his father, King Halvan Thessar, painted during the darkest years of the fighting, when the outcome of the war still hung uncertain. His father had never spoken much of those years, even in old age, except once, late in his life, when he had told a young Vorn something that had stayed with him ever since. "The hardest battles are not fought with weapons, my son. They are fought with fear, and the willingness to see past it toward what is true, even when truth is inconvenient, even when it costs us pride we would rather keep." Vorn had not understood those words fully as a young man. He understood them now, sitting alone in the quiet dark, weighing the fate of his entire empire against the calm, patient warning of a woman who had crossed the stars alone to deliver it. He thought of General Threxus, a good soldier consumed by old fear. He thought of Counselor Yalna, urging caution built on reason rather than anger. And he thought of Elena Marsh herself, calm and tired and entirely unafraid, standing before his throne, with nothing to gain from lying, and everything to lose if her warning went unheeded. Perhaps that is the true test of any ruler, he murmured quietly to the empty room. Not how we face wars we understand, but how we face dangers we do not, when an old enemy offers us the only path through them. He set his father's portrait down gently and rose from his chair, walking to the window to look out once more at the golden city sleeping peacefully below, unaware of how close its fate now rested on the careful, uncertain judgment of its king. The morning after Elena Marsh was taken to her guest chamber, word of the human captain's presence had already spread far beyond the palace walls. In the science towers, a team of Thessarian researchers, led by an older scholar named Dr. Heman Voss, worked through the night without rest, poring over every piece of evidence Elena had provided. Dr. Voss had spent 40 years studying deep space phenomena, and nothing in his long career had prepared him for what he found buried within the human sensor logs. "Look at this decay pattern," he said to his assistants near dawn, pointing at a section of data showing the aftermath of a fragment attack on an unnamed system years earlier. "This is not natural. No known weapon creates this kind of total structural breakdown across an entire planet's crust. Whatever did this did not simply destroy the world. It consumed it, piece by piece, down to the very core." His younger assistant, a nervous researcher named Talus Wren, stared at the data with growing horror. "Doctor, if this is real, and it is truly coming toward us, then we had better hope the humans are as prepared as their captain claims," Voss said grimly, "because nothing in our current arsenal could stop something capable of this." By the time the sun rose fully over the science towers, Dr. Voss had compiled a preliminary report confirming that every measurable detail of the human evidence matched known laws of physics, and matched, disturbingly, certain faint anomalies Thessarian deep border sensors had themselves recorded over recent months, without anyone understanding their true significance. The report would not reach the King's Council until morning, but already, within the tired, shaken science team, belief had begun to replace skepticism. That night, the palace of Thessar Prime did not sleep. Lights burned late in the science towers, where teams of scholars and engineers pored over the evidence Elena Marsh had given them, checking every number, every sensor log, every claim against their own knowledge of the stars. In the military wing, General Threxus stood over maps of the outer colonies, quietly ordering ships repositioned, though he still gave no public reason for the sudden movement of fleets. And in a small, comfortable guest chamber near the Eastern Gardens, Captain Elena Marsh sat alone, waiting. She was allowed no communication with her ship, no contact with anyone beyond the 2 guards posted silently outside her door. She did not complain about this. She understood the caution. If she had been in the king's place, she would have done the same, and likely more. So she waited, patiently, the way she had been trained to wait, through long years of quiet duty, aboard Darkships, built for exactly this kind of careful, dangerous work. She did not know that, in another part of the palace, General Threxus was meeting with a small group of officers loyal only to him, men and women who remembered the old war, not as a distant story, but as a living wound, a defeat they had never accepted, a silence they had always believed was weakness rather than peace. "The king grows old and cautious," Threxus said quietly to the officers gathered around him. "He listens to this human woman's story of monsters in the dark, and he forgets what humans truly are, liars, tricksters. They fought us for years, and then vanished like cowards, rather than face us fully. Now they return with tales of some great danger, conveniently asking for access to our fleets, our defenses, our secrets, all under the excuse of an alliance against an enemy none of us have ever seen with our own eyes." One of the younger officers frowned. "But General, the evidence the scientists are studying—" "Numbers on a screen," Threxus snapped. "Easily created by anyone clever enough to build such devices. I do not doubt the humans are clever. I have always said so. That is exactly why we cannot trust them now, when it matters most." "What would you have us do, General?" another officer asked quietly. Threxus's eyes hardened. "The king will make his decision in the morning, based on reports from scientists who see only numbers, not the true danger, sitting quietly in our guest chambers. I intend to make certain that decision favors caution, not blind trust. If the human captain disappears before morning, quietly, without violence, without evidence pointing to any of us, then there will be no alliance to argue about at all. Only a mystery, and a fleet still fully under Thessarian control, unweakened by foreign entanglements. The younger officer paled slightly. You mean to have her killed, General? I mean to protect our empire, Threxus said coldly. From threats old and new alike. The two officers chosen for the task were veterans of the Border Patrol, men who had served under Threxus for many years and trusted his judgment completely. Neither of them questioned the order beyond a brief, uneasy silence before agreeing. They had both lost family members in the old war, and neither found it difficult to believe that a human captain, however calm and reasonable she appeared, might be exactly the kind of clever trap General Threxus feared. Move quietly, Threxus instructed them as they prepared to leave. No blades that leave obvious wounds if it can be avoided. Make it appear as though she simply fell ill in the night, or suffered some unfortunate accident. I do not want the king asking uncomfortable questions afterward. The two officers nodded and slipped away into the darkened halls of the palace, moving with the practiced silence of soldiers, trained for exactly this kind of quiet, dangerous work. Neither of them had any idea that the woman they were about to face had survived far worse than two armed attackers in the dark, during years spent hunting fragments of an enemy that made ordinary assassins look like children playing at war. Elena Marsh woke in the deep hours of the night to the faint, careful sound of her chamber door sliding open, far too quietly for any honest guard changing shifts. Years of training aboard Darkships, years of learning to sense danger in silence and shadow, brought her fully awake in an instant, though she did not move, did not open her eyes fully, only watched through the smallest sliver of vision, as two figures slipped into her room, dressed in dark Thessarian uniforms, with no visible rank markings. She did not wait for them to reach her bed. In one smooth motion, she rolled from beneath the blankets and onto her feet, putting the heavy wooden chair from the corner of the room between herself and the two intruders. I would advise against this, she said calmly, her voice cutting through the darkness. Whatever General Threxus has told you to believe about me, know this. I did not survive 60 years of hunting fragments of the hollow across dead systems by being easy to kill quietly in the dark. The two figures hesitated only a moment before one of them lunged forward, a short blade catching what little light there was in the room. Elena moved smoothly, catching the attacker's arm and turning it aside with practiced ease, using his own momentum to send him crashing into the wall. The second attacker rushed in from the side, but Elena was already moving, ducking low and sweeping his legs out from under him before he could bring his weapon to bear. The commotion brought the two guards from outside the door rushing in, weapons drawn, only to find their captain's would-be assassins groaning on the floor, and Captain Elena Marsh standing calmly beside the overturned chair, entirely unharmed. Take them to the king, Elena said simply. I believe he will want to ask them some questions. By the time the sun rose over Thessar Prime, the throne room was once again filled with tension, though of a very different kind than the day before. King Vorn Thessar sat upon his throne, his face carved from stone, as the two captured attackers were dragged before him, their uniforms confirmed to belong to units under General Threxus's direct command. Explain this, the king said, his voice dangerously quiet. General Threxus stood stiffly before the throne, his face pale, but his jaw set with stubborn defiance. Majesty, I acted only to protect this empire from a threat I still believe is real, whether it wears a monster's face or a human one. I could not, in good conscience, allow this woman to remain alive to spread her lies and weaken us from within. And so you sent assassins into my palace, against my own guest, under my own protection, without my knowledge or permission, King Vorn said, each word heavier than the last. I did what I believed necessary, Threxus said. Counselor Yalma stepped forward, her expression grim. Majesty, the science teams have finished their full review of the human captain's evidence overnight. Every sensor log, every technical detail, checked and rechecked against our own instruments and records. I regret to say the evidence appears genuine. The pattern of destruction, the energy signatures, the path of movement, all of it matches phenomena our own deep border sensors recorded faintly over the past several months. phenomena we did not understand until now. The throne room fell utterly silent. Even General Threxus seemed to lose some of his hard certainty, his eyes flickering toward the human captain standing quietly to the side, unharmed, patient, watching the unfolding chaos with calm, tired eyes. "You attempted to murder the one person who came to warn us of a genuine and growing danger," King Vorn said slowly, "because you could not set aside 60 years of old anger long enough to listen. Do you understand what you have done, General Threxus? Not only have you betrayed my trust and broken the law of this palace, you have very nearly cost us the one clear warning we had, of a threat that could destroy everything we have built." Threxus said nothing, his silence more honest than any argument could have been. "Take him to the lower cells," the king commanded his guards. "He will remain there until I decide what is to be done with him. Any officer who assisted him in this plot will be found and questioned. I will not have traitors, however well-meaning they believe themselves to be, deciding the fate of this empire in secret." As the guards led General Threxus away, King Vorn turned at last to Elena Marsh, his expression heavy with something between exhaustion and grim respect. "You could have been killed in my own palace, Captain, under my own protection," the king said. "And yet you stand here calmly, as though such things happen to you every day." "They happen more often than I would like, Your Majesty," Elena said simply. "But I did not come here expecting an easy welcome. 60 years of silence leaves room for a great deal of fear and old anger to grow. I only hoped that reason would win out before too much damage was done. I am glad, for both our sakes, that it has." King Vorn studied her for a long moment, then looked to Counselor Yalna. "Tell me plainly, Counselor, do you believe this alliance is truly our best path forward?" Yalna did not hesitate. "I do, Majesty. The evidence is clear, and troubling. We do not have the knowledge or experience to face this hollow alone, not with any confidence of survival. The humans have spent 60 years preparing for exactly this moment. To refuse their help now, out of old pride or old anger, would be a mistake our children and grandchildren would pay for dearly." The king nodded slowly, then rose from his throne and descended the steps to stand directly before Elena Marsh, closer than he had come at any point since her arrival. "Captain Marsh," he said, "it seems my empire owes you a great deal, and perhaps a great apology as well, for the poor welcome you have received here. I am prepared to discuss the terms of an alliance between our peoples, in earnest, starting today. But I must ask you plainly, can your people truly help us prepare in time? 2 years is not long, even for an empire far more advanced than mine." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first genuine expression of relief she had shown since stepping off her shuttle the day before. "Your Majesty, 2 years is more time than my people had when we first learned of the Hollow's existence. We built everything we have now from far less, with full cooperation between our empires, sharing resources, knowledge, and industry. I believe we can build defenses strong enough to give both our peoples a real chance, not just to survive the Hollow's arrival, but to turn it back entirely." King Vorn nodded slowly, some of the weight in his old shoulders easing slightly at her words. "Then let us begin, Captain Marsh. 60 years of silence between our peoples ends today. I only hope it is not too little, too late." Outside the palace, far above the golden towers of Thessar Prime, Elena's Darkship. Quiet Word still floated quietly in the inner ring, waiting patiently, exactly as it had since the moment it first appeared. Soon, it would no longer be alone. Soon, human ships would begin arriving openly, not as invaders, not as conquerors, but as allies, bringing with them 60 years of hard lessons learned in the cold dark beyond the old borders. But far beyond the edges of both empires, unseen and uncaring of politics or old grudges or new alliances, the Hollow continued its slow, steady march inward, growing larger, growing stronger, entirely indifferent to whether the beings in its path chose to face it together or alone. In the lower cells beneath the palace, General Threxus sat alone in the darkness, replaying the morning's events over and over in his mind. He had expected the king's anger. He had expected punishment. What he had not expected was the quiet, steady evidence from the science towers, confirming everything the human captain had claimed. Evidence that made his own actions look not just foolish, but dangerous in a way he had never intended. He thought of the two officers he had sent, veterans who had trusted him completely, now facing their own judgment for following his orders. He thought of the human woman standing calmly before the throne, unharmed despite his best efforts, her expression showing not anger or triumph, but something closer to simple, tired disappointment. I was so certain. He thought bitterly, staring at the stone wall of his cell. So certain that 60 years of silence could only hide more war. What if I was wrong about everything? He did not sleep that night, turning old certainties over in his mind again and again, searching for some comfort in his own actions, and finding none. Whatever came next, whatever punishment the king decided upon, Threxus understood clearly now that his own fear and old anger had very nearly cost his empire its only warning against a danger far greater than any war he had ever fought. Word of the failed assassination attempt spread quickly through the palace, despite the king's efforts to keep it quiet, and by midday, whispers of it had reached even the lower city, where old soldiers like Brenna Colt listened with grim, complicated feelings to news that a Thessarian general had tried to murder the human captain in the night. So the humans did not lie about coming in peace, Brenna said to her neighbor Tovis, watching the golden towers of the palace from her narrow balcony. It was our own people who nearly started a new war before this one even had the chance to become an alliance. Tovis shook his head slowly. 60 years of fear does strange things to good soldiers, Brenna. I do not think the general is evil. I think he is simply old, and frightened, and unable to imagine a world where humans are not the enemy he fought as a young man. Perhaps, Brenna said quietly, but if we cannot learn to set aside old fears when the evidence stands plainly before us, I fear we will make far worse mistakes than General Threxus has already made, and we may not survive to regret them. Her words, spoken quietly on a narrow balcony in the lower city, would prove more prophetic than she could have possibly known that morning, as the combined weight of old fear and new danger continued to press down upon both empires in the difficult months that lay ahead. Aboard the quiet word. Still floating quietly in the inner ring above Thessar Prime, the ship's automated systems had recorded the entire assassination attempt in detail, alerted by the sudden spike in Elena's vital signs during the brief struggle. Had she not subdued her attackers within moments, the ship carried protocols that would have activated automatically, sending a warning burst back toward human space, and, if she had been seriously harmed, initiating a full withdrawal sequence designed to protect the sensitive technology aboard from falling into unfamiliar hands. None of the Thessarians present in the palace that night knew how close they had come to a very different outcome, one where the fragile beginnings of an alliance might have collapsed entirely into fresh suspicion and fear. The quiet word. Vanishing back into the dark from which it came, its warning left undelivered and unheeded. Elena herself considered this quietly the following afternoon, once the immediate chaos of General Threxus's trial had passed and the palace had begun settling into its new, uneasy calm. She requested, and was granted, brief access back to her ship under close guard, both to reassure Fleet Command that she remained safe, and to review the recorded data from the attack in full. "You handled yourself well," came the calm voice of Fleet Admiral Bethany Cole, through the ship's long-range communication array, relayed across the vast distance separating human space from Thessar Prime, with only a short delay. "Though I confess, we were moments away from initiating recovery protocols when your vitals spiked so suddenly." "I am glad it did not come to that, Admiral," Elena replied. "A withdrawal now, however justified, would have confirmed every fear General Threxus and men like him already carried about us. It would have ended any chance of the alliance before it truly began." "Agreed," Cole said, "but be careful, Elena. Old fears do not vanish simply because a king wills them to. You have earned a difficult trust today, but it remains fragile. Handle it as carefully as you handled those two blades in the dark." "I intend to, Admiral," Elena said quietly, watching through the viewport as Thessarian guard ships continued their careful patrol around her Darkship, no longer purely suspicious now, but not yet fully trusting either. One careful step at a time, exactly as we planned from the very beginning. In the days immediately following General Threxus's trial, King Vorn Thessar called a full meeting of his council to formally begin the work of the new alliance. Human representatives arrived for the first time, under open invitation, rather than secretive stealth, their shuttles escorted respectfully, rather than surrounded with weapons locked and ready. Among them was Fleet Admiral Bethany Cole herself, traveling from human space to meet the Thessarian king in person, and finalize the terms both sides would honor going forward. "Your Majesty," Cole said, bowing respectfully before the throne, her manner calm and direct in a way that reminded the king strongly of Captain Marsh. "On behalf of the human assembly, I want to thank you for your courage in choosing trust over old fear. It is not an easy choice, and we do not take it lightly." "Nor do I take your people's honesty lightly, Admiral," King Vorn replied. "Captain Marsh could have simply demanded our cooperation, given the clear evidence of your people's strength. Instead, she asked, and waited, and endured suspicion, and even violence. With patience, I am not certain I could have managed in her place. That patience has earned more trust from me than any show of force ever could have." The terms of the alliance were laid out carefully over the following days. Human engineers would share detailed technical knowledge of hollow-resistant defenses, weapons frequencies, and shield configurations, developed over 60 years of hard experience. Thessarian shipyards, among the most productive in the region, would begin producing modified versions of these defenses at a scale human industry alone could not match quickly enough. Joint fleets would train together, under combined command structures, learning to fight not as two separate forces cooperating loosely, but as a single unified defense. The months that followed the king's decision brought changes to Thessar Prime faster than anyone in the Empire had ever known before. Human ships began arriving openly now, not sneaking past defenses in secret like the Quiet Word had done, but announcing themselves clearly at the border, escorted in under careful watch, carrying engineers, scientists, and soldiers, eager to begin the work of preparing both empires for what was coming. At first, the Thessarian people were afraid. 60 years of silence had left deep scars, old stories of the war passed down through families, who remembered lost fathers, lost sisters, lost friends. Many did not trust the sudden arrival of their old enemies, no matter what the king declared from his throne. Protests broke out in some of the outer cities. Old soldiers who had fought in the war spoke bitterly on public broadcasts, warning that this alliance was nothing more than a slow, patient conquest, dressed up in friendly words. But King Vorn Thessar held firm, and slowly, carefully, the fear began to soften into something else. Human engineers worked side by side with Thessarian scientists, sharing knowledge freely, holding nothing back. Human soldiers trained alongside Thessarian forces, teaching hard lessons learned from years of fighting fragments of the Hollow, in the cold dark beyond both empires' borders. And Captain Elena Marsh remained at the king's side throughout it all, a steady, patient presence, answering every question honestly, never once asking for anything beyond what was needed to prepare for the coming danger. General Threxus remained in the lower cells during these months, stripped of his rank, awaiting the king's final judgment. He watched from a small window as human ships passed overhead, and though his pride still burned with old resentment, even he could not deny the strange, quiet honesty of the humans working openly beside his own people. They asked for no special treatment, took no more resources than what was needed, and shared every piece of knowledge they carried, even the parts that revealed their own past failures and losses in earlier battles against the Hollow. On the training grounds near the capital's largest shipyard, human instructors worked daily alongside Thessarian recruits, teaching combat drills built from hard lessons learned, fighting the Hollow's fragments in the dark beyond human space. A young Thessarian pilot named Verna Kess, barely out of flight academy, found herself paired often with a human instructor named Lieutenant Marcus Yin, a quiet, patient man who had lost his own brother in an early skirmish against a Hollow fragment years before. "Again," Yin said calmly, watching Verna's simulated formation shift too slowly on the training display. "The Hollow adapts faster than that. If you hesitate even a moment, it finds the gap and exploits it." "It is difficult," Verna admitted, frustrated. "Our fleet has trained for enemies who think like us, who plan and react the way soldiers plan and react. This thing does not think that way at all." "No," Yin agreed. "It does not think the way we do. That is exactly why we must think faster than it can adapt, rather than trying to outplan something that has no real plan, beyond consuming everything in its path. Trust your training, and trust your instincts." Both will serve you better than overthinking when the moment actually comes. Verna nodded slowly, running the simulation again, this time shifting her formation half a second faster, and watching with quiet satisfaction as the simulated hollow fragment failed to adapt in time. Small victories like this one repeated themselves daily across the growing joint fleet, human patience and hard-earned experience slowly merging with Thessarian skill and local knowledge of their own systems and defenses. Not every Thessarian soldier accepted the alliance easily. Old resentments lingered, especially among veterans who had fought in the original war and lost friends or family to human forces decades before. Fights broke out occasionally in shared barracks, old insults traded alongside new frustrations, and more than once, senior officers on both sides had to step in to calm tempers before training exercises could properly continue. But slowly, through shared danger and shared purpose, something resembling genuine respect began growing where only old suspicion had existed before. Counselor Yalna Rotha became the Empire's chief voice in the growing alliance, working closely with Elena to coordinate the flow of ships, supplies, and information between the two peoples. It was Yalna who first noticed something troubling buried within the shared sensor data one late evening, nearly a year into the alliance. "Captain Marsh," Yalna said, calling Elena to the science tower urgently. "You need to see this." Elena studied the readings carefully, her calm expression tightening as she recognized the pattern immediately. "The hollow's speed has increased, significantly. By nearly double," Yala confirmed grimly. "At this new rate, it will reach the outer Thessarian colonies within 4 months, not the 2 years we originally calculated." Elena closed her eyes briefly, running the numbers again in her mind, hoping for some error, some mistake in the data. There was none. It must have found a particularly rich system to feed on recently, something large enough to accelerate its growth, far beyond our earlier estimates. 4 months, Yala repeated, her voice tight with growing fear. "Captain, our defenses are not ready. We have made progress, real progress, but not enough." "Not in 4 months." Elena did not answer immediately. She thought of the 60 years her own people had spent preparing, the hard lessons paid for in blood and lost ships and lost lives, all condensed now into a single year of frantic, shared effort with the Thessarian Empire. It would not be enough, not fully. But perhaps, she thought, it could be enough to survive the first strike, if they moved quickly and wisely. "We need to speak with the king immediately," Elena said, "and I need to contact my own fleet command. If the hollow is accelerating, we may need to bring forward reinforcements we had planned to send later." King Vorn Thessar received the news with the same steady calm he had shown since the day Elena Marsh first stood before his throne, though those closest to him could see the deep worry hidden behind his old eyes. 4 months, the king repeated slowly, staring at the star map now showing the dark stain of the hollow spreading faster than anyone had feared. "Captain Marsh, what do you recommend?" "We concentrate our efforts on the outer colonies, directly in the hollow's path, Your Majesty," Elena said. "Full evacuation of civilian populations where possible, combined defense fleets stationed at the most likely points of first contact, and immediate deployment of everything my people can spare from reserve forces. I have already sent word to my fleet command requesting additional Darkships and support vessels be sent ahead of schedule." "And if this is not enough?" the king asked quietly. Elena met his gaze steadily. "Then we will do what my people have always done when facing the hollow, with insufficient strength, Your Majesty. We will make it cost them everything they gain from us, so that even in retreat, we weaken them for whatever comes after." The king nodded slowly, understanding the grim honesty in her words. "Then let us begin immediately. Counselor Yalna, coordinate the evacuation efforts personally. I want no colony caught unprepared when the hollow arrives." The evacuation of the outer colonies proved far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. Many families had lived on those worlds for generations, and despite the clear danger approaching, some refused to leave homes their ancestors had built with their own hands. Counselor Yalna traveled personally to several of the most stubborn colonies, spending long hours convincing local leaders of the danger, sharing the same evidence that had convinced the king himself months before. "I understand your attachment to this place," Yalna told one elderly colony leader on a farming world near the border, a man named Corin Vess, who had spent 60 years working the same fields his grandfather had first cleared. but no attachment to land is worth more than the lives of your people. Elder Vess. Please, trust the evidence, even if you cannot yet trust the messenger who brought it. In the end, most colonies agreed to evacuate, though not without grief and difficulty. Entire communities uprooted and moved deeper into safer Thessarian territory, their fields and homes left behind to face whatever came next. It was a painful cost of preparation, but one that would prove, in the difficult months ahead, to have saved countless lives that might otherwise have been lost entirely. As preparations accelerated across both empires, General Threxus was brought once more before the king, this time not as a prisoner awaiting judgment, but as a soldier whose skills and experience were suddenly, urgently needed. You have caused great harm through your foolish pride, General, King Vorn said, studying the disgraced officer standing before him. But you remain one of the finest military minds this empire has produced. I am prepared to offer you a chance to prove your loyalty is truly to this empire, and not merely to your own old anger. Will you serve, under Captain Marsh's guidance, to help prepare our defenses against the true enemy that is coming? Threxus stood silent for a long moment, his pride visibly warring with the plain, hard truth of what he had seen over the past year. The humans had not conquered, had not tricked, had not betrayed. They had simply worked, quietly and honestly, to prepare both peoples for a danger that was now undeniably real and rapidly approaching. I will serve, Your Majesty, Threxus said finally, his voice rough with something between shame and grim determination. I was wrong about the humans. I will not be wrong about this. Whatever the Hollow is, whatever it takes to stop it, I will give everything I have to protect this empire. Elena, standing quietly nearby, studied the former general carefully. Welcome back to service, General Threxus. I will be honest with you, as I have tried to be honest with everyone since I arrived. What is coming will be hard and costly, no matter how well we prepare. But I would rather face it with a skilled and honest soldier at my side than without one, whatever mistakes were made before. Threxus gave a stiff nod, some of the old hardness in his eyes softening slightly at her words. Then let us get to work, Captain. We have little enough time as it is. In the weeks that followed, Threxus threw himself into the work, with an intensity that surprised even those who had known him for years. He spent long hours studying human tactical records, questioning human officers directly about strategies he did not fully understand, and slowly earning back a measure of trust from soldiers who had heard whispers of his disgrace, but respected the hard, focused effort he now poured into preparing the combined fleet. You have changed, General, Counselor Yalna observed one evening, finding him still awake late at night, reviewing defense simulations alongside a team of exhausted human and Thessarian officers. I have been made to see clearly, Counselor, Threxus answered without looking up from his work. For 60 years I told myself the humans were the true danger this empire needed to fear. I was wrong, and my pride nearly cost us everything. I do not intend to make that same mistake twice, whatever it costs me now to correct it. Elena, standing nearby, said nothing, but privately she found herself increasingly impressed by the former general's willingness to change course so completely, once shown the truth. It reminded her of something her own grandmother, one of the first human scientists to study early hollow fragments decades before, had once told her. The measure of a person is not whether they are ever wrong, child. Everyone is wrong sometimes. The measure is what they do once they discover their error. 4 months passed faster than anyone would have liked, filled with endless work, endless preparation, and the constant, grinding fear of watching the Hollow's dark shape creep steadily closer on every star map across both empires. Human and Thessarian ships trained together constantly, refining strategies born from 60 years of hard human experience, combined with Thessarian knowledge of their own local systems and defenses. Civilian populations were evacuated from the outer colonies, moved deeper into safer territory, though many refused to leave entirely, choosing instead to stay and support the defense efforts however they could. On the day the Hollow finally reached the edge of Thessarian space, a combined fleet of human and Thessarian ships stood waiting at the border, more prepared than either empire could have managed alone, though still uncertain if it would be enough. Elena Marsh stood on the bridge of a newly arrived human command ship, the Silent Vigil. Beside General Threxus and a young Thessarian fleet commander named Verna Kess, watching the sensor screens as the first fragments of the Hollow's outer swarm appeared at the edge of detection range, dark and hungry, spreading slowly toward the waiting fleet. "There it is," Threxus said quietly, his voice steady, despite the fear plainly visible in his eyes. "After all these months of preparation, there it finally is." "Yes," Elena said, her own voice calm, but serious, years of hard experience settling over her like a familiar heavy coat. "And now we find out if 60 years of human preparation, combined with a single year of desperate Thessarian effort, is truly enough to save both our peoples." The dark swarm of the Hollow drew closer across the star map, slow, patient, utterly indifferent to the fear and hope carried by the combined fleet waiting to meet it. Behind that fleet stood two empires, once bitter enemies, now standing together for the very first time in 60 years, their fate resting on whether old wounds could truly be set aside quickly enough to survive what was coming. "All ships," Elena said calmly, into the fleet-wide channel, her voice carrying across every bridge, human and Thessarian alike. "Hold formation. Trust your training. Trust each other. We have prepared for this moment as best we could, together. Now let us prove that preparation was worth the cost." Far below on Thessar Prime, King Vorn Thessar stood at the tallest window of his palace, watching the distant flashes of light beginning to bloom silently at the edge of his empire's border, and prayed, in the quiet, private way old kings sometimes did, that the strange alliance he had chosen to trust would be enough to save everything he had spent his long life protecting. Beside him stood Counselor Yalna, watching the same distant flashes with her own quiet fear, carefully hidden behind a calm expression. "It is strange, is it not, Your Majesty," she said softly, "that our fate now rests on trust between old enemies, built in barely more than a single year, against a danger neither of us fully understood until recently." "Strange," the king agreed, "and yet somehow it feels like the only path that could have brought us here with any hope at all. Had we refused the humans' warning, had we let old pride and old fear win over reason, we would be facing this alone, and far less prepared than we are now." "And if it is not enough?" Yalna asked quietly. The king was silent for a long moment before answering. "Then at least we will have faced it honestly, together, rather than blindly, alone. That is more than my father's generation managed during the war, when pride alone shaped so many of our worst decisions." Below them, in the palace gardens, young Ossic, now promoted to a full guard position after his quiet loyalty during the assassination attempt months before, stood watch alongside older soldiers, all of them glancing occasionally toward the dark sky, wondering what news the coming hours would bring from the distant border, where the fate of their entire world was now being decided. The first hour of the battle at the edge of Thessarian space passed in a strange, tense quiet, as the combined fleet watched the Hollow's leading fragments drift closer across their sensor screens, slow and patient, entirely unlike any enemy formation either human or Thessarian commanders had studied before. "No formation at all," Fleet Commander Verna Kess murmured, watching the readings from her own command chair aboard a Thessarian cruiser stationed near the center of the defensive line. "Just movement, spreading, searching, like water finding cracks in stone." "That is close to accurate," Elena's voice came through the shared fleet channel, calm and steady, despite the tension gripping every ship in the line. "It does not plan the way we plan, Commander. It simply tests every possible path forward, and follows whichever proves easiest. Our task is to make certain no path is easy." The first exchange of fire came without warning, a sudden burst of strange, dark energy lancing out from the leading edge of the Hollow's swarm toward the nearest Thessarian picket ship. Shields flared bright red on sensor screens across the fleet as the small vessel absorbed the blow, its hull groaning under strain but holding, at least for the moment. "All ships, hold the line," Elena ordered. "Do not break formation to assist. Trust your neighbors to hold their positions exactly as we drilled." It was the hardest order any commander could give, and the hardest to follow, watching allied ships take damage without immediately rushing to their aid. But months of joint training had drilled this discipline deeply into both human and Thessarian crews, and the formation held, gaps closing smoothly, as damaged ships rotated back through supporting lines, while fresh vessels moved forward to take their place. The battle at the edge of Thessarian space lasted 3 long, brutal days. The Hollow did not attack like any enemy fleet the Thessarians had ever faced before. It did not use tactics, did not retreat when losing, did not care for its own losses in any way a normal military mind could understand. It simply pushed forward endlessly, throwing wave after wave of strange, half-organic, half-machine vessels against the combined human and Thessarian fleet, each wave slightly different from the last, adapting in small ways to whatever defenses had worked against the wave before. Elena Marsh had seen this pattern many times before, in smaller battles against fragments of the hollow far beyond human space. She had trained the combined fleet for exactly this kind of fight, teaching Thessarian commanders how to constantly shift formations, weapon frequencies, and shield patterns so the hollow could never fully adapt to any single strategy, before it was already replaced by another. "Rotate to Formation 7, Elena ordered calmly, during the height of the second day's fighting, watching the sensor screens as another wave of the hollow's strange vessels pressed against the fleet's defenses. "Thessarian gunners, shift to the secondary frequency pattern now, exactly as we drilled." Across the fleet, human and Thessarian ships moved together with practiced precision, the months of hard joint training finally paying off in the heat of true battle. General Threxus, now serving as fleet coordinator alongside Elena, watched with grim satisfaction as another wave of the hollow's forces broke apart against the fleet's shifting defenses, unable to adapt quickly enough to the constantly changing patterns. "They are slowing," Threxus said, studying the readings carefully. "The hollow's adaptation speed cannot keep pace with our formation changes." "Then we keep changing," Elena said. "As long as we stay one step ahead of its ability to learn, we hold the line." But holding the line came at a terrible cost. By the end of the second day, nearly a third of the combined fleet had been lost, human and Thessarian ships alike, brave crews, who had given everything to protect two empires that had been bitter enemies only a year before. Elena felt each loss personally, remembering the 60 years of hard lessons her own people had paid for in exactly this kind of grinding, costly struggle. Aboard her cruiser near the front line, Verna Kess watched helplessly as a supporting Thessarian destroyer, badly damaged from an earlier exchange, took a final, fatal strike from a hollow fragment that had slipped briefly past the shifting formation. The ship broke apart silently on her screen, its crew of nearly 200 lost in an instant, and for a moment, young Verna felt the full, crushing weight of command settle over her far heavier than any training exercise had prepared her for. "Commander," came a steady voice over her private channel. It was Lieutenant Marcus Yin, her human training partner from the months before, now serving as her direct tactical advisor during the battle itself. "I know that pain. I lost my brother the same way, watching helplessly from two ships over. It does not get easier. But you cannot let it stop you from making the next decision. Your crew needs you steady, right now, more than ever." Verna took a slow breath, forcing her focus back to the shifting battle lines before her. "Understood, Lieutenant. Recommend formation adjustment to cover the gap left by the windwards loss." "Agreed," Yin said. "Sending revised coordinates now. You are doing exactly what needs doing, Commander. Keep going." Small moments like this repeated across the fleet throughout the long, grinding battle, human and Thessarian officers steadying each other through losses that would have broken either force fighting entirely alone. The fragile trust built over the past year, proving its worth in the hardest way possible, through shared grief and shared determination rather than easy words alone. By the dawn of the third day, exhaustion had settled over every crew in the combined fleet like a physical weight. Elena had not slept properly in over 2 days, subsisting on quick meals eaten standing at her command station, her voice growing hoarse from constant orders across the fleet channel, though her calm steadiness never wavered outwardly, even as privately she began to wonder if the reserves she had requested would arrive in time. On the third day, as the fleet's reserves grew dangerously thin, and exhaustion weighed heavily on every crew, a new development appeared on the sensor screens that made even Elena's calm expression tighten with sudden hope. "Captain Marsh," the sensor officer called out urgently. "Long-range scanners are picking up a large incoming force. Human signatures, Captain. A lot of them." Elena's eyes widened slightly as she checked the readings herself. "Fleet Command must have accelerated the reinforcement timeline even further than we requested." She opened a channel immediately. "This is Captain Marsh of the Silent Vigil. Identify yourselves." The response came back a moment later, a familiar voice that brought a small, tired smile to Elena's exhausted face. "Captain Marsh, this is Admiral Reyes Okafor of the 2nd Fleet Reserve. We received your accelerated request 3 months ago and have been pushing our engines to the limit ever since. Sorry we cut it so close. Where do you need us?" "Right here, Admiral," Elena said, relief clear in her voice for the first time in 3 days. Right here would be perfect. The arrival of the human reserve fleet turned the tide of the battle decisively. With fresh ships and fresh crews joining the exhausted but still fighting combined fleet, the pressure on the Hollow's advancing forces increased sharply. Wave after wave of the Hollow's strange vessels were caught between the original defensive line and the newly arrived reserves, unable to adapt quickly enough to the sudden change in the battle's shape. The arrival of Admiral Okafor's reserve fleet brought a surge of renewed energy across every exhausted crew in the combined line. Fresh ships moved into formation smoothly, their crews rested and ready, providing exactly the additional strength the battered defensive line desperately needed. General Threxus, coordinating fleet movements from Elena's command ship, felt something close to relief for the first time in 3 days as he watched the new arrivals slide into place along the weakened sections of the formation. "Concentrate fire along their eastern approach," Threxus ordered, studying the shifting battle map carefully. "The fresh ships can absorb the pressure there, while our exhausted crews rotate back for brief repairs and rest." "Implementing now, General," came the response from a dozen ship captains across the combined fleet, human and Thessarian voices mixing together in the shared urgency of the moment, old distinctions of nationality forgotten entirely in the desperate, shared fight for survival. By the end of the 3rd day, the Hollow's advance had been broken entirely. What remained of its forward swarm retreated slowly back into the deep dark beyond the border, wounded and diminished, though Elena knew from hard experience that this was not truly an ending, only a pause. The Hollow would return eventually, elsewhere, perhaps stronger, perhaps having learned new lessons from this defeat. But for now, both empires had survived, together, exactly as Elena had hoped when she first crossed the stars alone to deliver her warning. The celebrations on Thessar Prime lasted for days after the fleet's victorious return. Streets that had once whispered fearfully about the strange, silent human ships, now filled with genuine cheering crowds, welcoming home both Thessarian and human crews together, side by side, heroes of a battle that had nearly cost everything. King Vorn Thessar stood once again in his great throne room, though this time the mood was entirely different from the tense, fearful gathering of over a year before. Captain Elena Marsh stood before him once more, though she looked different now too, tired from battle, but standing taller somehow, no longer merely a messenger delivering an unwelcome warning, but a true and trusted ally who had helped save an entire empire. "Captain Marsh," the king said warmly, "when you first stood before me, I did not know whether to fear you, trust you, or simply be amazed that a single ship could cross my defenses so completely. Now, I find myself simply grateful, more grateful than I have words to properly express." "You do not need to thank me alone, Your Majesty," Elena said, gesturing toward General Threxus and Counselor Yalna, who stood nearby along with Admiral Reyes Okafor and Fleet Commander Verna Kess. "This victory belongs to everyone who chose to set aside old fears and old anger, long enough to work together, even when it was difficult, even when trust had to be earned slowly, piece by piece." General Threxus stepped forward, his old pride replaced now by a quieter, harder-earned respect. "I was wrong about your people, Captain Marsh, deeply wrong. I let 60 years of old anger blind me to the truth standing right in front of me. I am grateful the king gave me the chance to make amends, and grateful you were willing to trust me again, despite everything." "You fought bravely and honestly once you chose to fight beside us, General," Elena said. "That matters more than old mistakes, however serious they were." King Vorn raised his hand, and the room quieted respectfully. "Today, I wish to formally announce what has already proven true, through blood and sacrifice on both sides. The Thessarian Empire and the human people are no longer old enemies, bound only by 60 years of uneasy silence. We are allies, bound together by a shared victory and a shared danger that still waits somewhere out in the dark, beyond our borders. Let this alliance stand as a lesson to both our peoples, that old wounds, however deep, can heal when both sides choose honesty and courage over fear and old pride." The throne room erupted into applause, human and Thessarian voices mixing together for the first time in true celebration, rather than old suspicion. Elena Marsh stood quietly amid the noise, thinking back to the calm, patient voice she had used to first announce herself outside Thessar Prime, unsure then whether her lonely mission would end in war, in death, or in the alliance that now stood proudly around her. Later that evening, standing alone on a quiet balcony overlooking the golden city of Thessar Prime, Elena watched the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, knowing that somewhere far beyond them, the Hollow continued its slow, patient advance through the galaxy, wounded now, but not defeated, waiting for its next chance to consume whatever lay in its path. Admiral Reyes Okafor joined her quietly on the balcony, following her gaze up toward the stars. "You did well, Elena. Better than well. You turned a 60-year silence into an alliance that just might save us all, human and Thessarian alike." "We are not finished yet, Reyes," Elena said quietly. "The Hollow will return, perhaps here, perhaps somewhere else along the border. We have won time, not victory. Time to grow stronger together, time to prepare for whatever comes next. Then we will use that time well," Reyes said firmly. "Together, this time, instead of alone." Elena nodded slowly, allowing herself, finally, a small measure of quiet hope as she looked out over the golden towers of a city that had once feared her arrival, and now stood ready to fight alongside her people, against whatever darkness still waited among the stars. Behind them, the celebration continued long into the night, human and Thessarian voices rising together in the golden halls of Thessar Prime, marking not an ending, but a beginning, the first true step of an alliance born from courage, honesty, and a single, quiet Darkship that had once appeared, unannounced and unafraid, beside an alien throne. In the months that followed the victory at the border, the alliance between the human people and the Thessarian Empire only grew stronger. Joint shipyards expanded across both territories. New generations of defense ships built from combined human and Thessarian design, taking shape in orbital docks that had once produced vessels meant only for each other's destruction. Young Thessarian children, like the small girl who had once asked Elena if she truly came from Earth, grew up now hearing new stories alongside the old ones. Stories of a human captain who came alone in peace, and a Thessarian king wise enough to listen. General Threxus, fully restored to his rank after his service in the battle, took command of the Empire's new combined training academy, where young officers from both peoples learned side by side from the very beginning of their service, rather than meeting each other first, as strangers burdened by old history. He often told his students the same lesson he had learned so painfully himself. "Pride is a poor advisor," he would say to each new class of recruits, human and Thessarian alike. "I let mine nearly cost us everything, blinding me to a truth that stood plainly before me. Listen carefully to those who come to you honestly, even old enemies, especially old enemies, for they often have the least reason to lie, and the most reason to finally tell the truth." Counselor Yalna Rothe continued serving as the Empire's chief diplomat to human space, traveling now regularly between Thessar Prime and the hidden human worlds she had once only read about in old, incomplete records. She often spoke of the old file she had found that first tense night, the report from Commander Oren describing human withdrawals 60 years before that no one at the time had understood. "We so often see only what our fears prepare us to see," she told the king during one of their regular private discussions, months after the battle. "It took a stranger's courage to finally show us what honesty looked like, even when we were too afraid to recognize it on our own." Elena Marsh remained on Thessar Prime for nearly a year after the battle, helping oversee the continued integration of human and Thessarian defense forces, before finally receiving new orders from Fleet Admiral Cole to return briefly to human space, to report directly to the Assembly on the Alliance's progress. King Vorn himself came to see her off personally at the same shuttle bay where she had first landed, under heavy guard, over a year before. "You arrived here alone, uncertain of your welcome, carrying nothing but a warning and a request to be heard," the king said, studying her with the same sharp, thoughtful gaze he had shown at their very first meeting, though now it carried warmth where suspicion had once lived. "You leave now, as the reason two ancient enemies stand together, for the first time in living memory. I do not think either of us fully understood that first tense morning, what your quiet arrival would ultimately mean for both our peoples. Nor did I, Your Majesty, Elena admitted, allowing herself a rare, genuine smile. I hoped only to deliver a warning and perhaps plant the first small seed of trust. I could not have imagined it would grow into everything it has become. Will you return? The king asked. Always, Elena said simply. This alliance is not something I delivered and then walked away from, Your Majesty. It is something I helped build, and something I intend to keep building, for as long as both our peoples need it, and I suspect, given what still waits for us out among the stars, that will be for a very long time indeed. As her shuttle lifted away from Thessar Prime that day, carrying her back toward the quiet Darkship still waiting faithfully in orbit, Elena looked down at the golden city below, remembering the frightened, suspicious world she had first descended into over a year before, and marveling quietly at how much could change when both sides finally chose courage over fear, and honesty over the comfortable, dangerous silence of old wounds left unexamined. Far beyond the golden towers of Thessar Prime, far beyond the newly strengthened border where human and Thessarian fleets now stood watch together, the Hollow continued its slow, patient march through the dark places of the galaxy, wounded but not destroyed, waiting somewhere out among the cold stars for its next chance to test the growing alliance that had, against every old expectation, chosen to stand together rather than fall apart. And on Thessar Prime, in the golden halls where fear had once ruled, hope now stood quietly in its place, carried there by a single, patient captain, and a dark, silent ship that had once appeared, unasked and unafraid, beside an alien throne.